Welcome to the Haunted Hacker podcast, Max Heinemeyer, Vol.2. So before we get started, I'll give a little bit of news and updates. Not a ton of stuff on the news. I will be speaking in Oklahoma City on December 1st at Innotech, and I'll be live at the Innotech conference on H4unt3d that afternoon as well. Next month, I'll be speaking for the U.S. DHS ICE group across the U.S., as well as a couple other speaking engagements that are coming up soon. One in December for the Spearfishing conference in the American Virgin Islands, and some more on that later. So today we have Volume 2 with my buddy Max. It's always a pleasure having Max on the show. We always have some great conversations. And Max, why don't you give us a little bit of your bio for those who haven't tuned in previously, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Mike, and hi to our audience. It's a pleasure to be here again. I'm so glad to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. I guess I'll keep it short. These days, I work for a company called Darktrace. We are at the intersection of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and cyber defense. And I've got a very privileged position to look at the tech, look at PR and marketing, and look at the product and speak to many customers. So I can see the hands-on cyber attacks in the trenches, but I can also see the big picture and see where the industry is moving and work a lot on the cutting edge research, which is amazing. But I've got a background in offensive security. I used to lead red teams and was a pen tester. And it's just in my blood. And I'm sure many of our listeners are very similar here, Mike. I know you are. And I've also worked in the SOC before. I used to lead blue teams and caught and wrestled some advanced persistent threats, as people like to call them these days, myself here and there. So yeah, very engaged in the community.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Max. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You and I go back quite a ways. When I was in London, for those of you who don't know our history, I went to London almost 3 years ago, and spent some time over there and met with Max in Cambridge and Mike Beck in London, because I was using Darktrace with a company in oil and gas. And me and Max struck up a conversation and been friends since. So it's been a pleasure, and we always have some really great topics. So what have you been up to since the last podcast?
Still some of the same things, meeting many customers, looking at threats, mentoring people is quite a big thing these days, helping people get into the industry, thinking about diverse backgrounds. But I've also spent a good portion of my brain cycles on thinking about active cyber defense, as people like to call it. And in another capacity, I work with a German but international think tank called Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, SNV. Maybe we can link it in the show notes, but they think a lot about, at the moment, active cyber defense, things like the Hafnium web shell removal, or some of the activities that the US Cybercom did in the past, or the Emotet botnet takedown. So whenever a government takes an active action and into a territory, or maybe even private entities do so, I think that's a very interesting topic, because we see it more and more, and there's kind of a lack of guidance, policy around it, assessments, frameworks. So I still do a lot of cyber stuff and AI, but I also spend a good portion of my thinking cycles on that aspect there.
It's very interesting. So I belong to a think tank in Europe called EMA, EEMA.org. And I was just on their ISSE conference for Europe. And the topic did come up about ransomware and some of the active responses to ransomware, which I've been kind of tossing around the idea myself now for probably about a month or two, and making some groundbreaking efforts on putting together an operation to take down some of those ransomware groups' infrastructure. So I can't go too far into the data or the technical details, because we're still kind of unfolding the tool. But it's going to be really interesting, and I think that's going to be the wave of the future. Looking at how often ransomware hits companies, and what I'm finding doing all the incident responses that I do is that, unless it's a large company or infrastructure, the U.S. doesn't really care. They let the small shops end up paying either the ransom or taking a hit and having to dig themselves out by paying large fees to cybersecurity insurance or incident response teams. So we're looking at more of a Robin Hood type perspective. Me and a couple other guys are looking at taking some of the data that is exposed by these groups and some of the known infrastructure and planning on a way of taking down that infrastructure as a way to protect people. Because unless, like I said, unless you're critical infrastructure or financial or large company, the U.S. government really doesn't care how much you lose. Do you see the same things in Europe as well?
Yeah, you mentioned some super interesting points there. I think that's the same across the world. I don't think they don't care. It's just a resource problem, right? There's so much ransomware going on. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to get worse as we see ransomware actors shift from the big game hunting to the mid game hunting, mm-hmm. which we already see in our data, where it's much more about the hidden champions, the mid to small size companies, where it doesn't attract enough attention for the FBI or the NSA to go and hunt down the Red's infrastructure. So companies are left to their own devices, and I think it's going to get worse. I think it's really good to see those government actions, though, that we started seeing. Mm-hmm. It's another tool in the toolbox to combat cybercrime and ransomware. For too long, it's been, a free game. Anybody with a bit of skill and a bulletproof infrastructure could wreak havoc and earn a lot of cash, and was basically immune from law enforcement. So I welcome these efforts to a certain extent. I think it's a very differentiated discussion depending on the operation, how it's conducted. Mm-hmm. But I think some of the things you highlighted or hinted at, Mike, with your crew, where you maybe collect that attackers' infrastructure information and maybe you bundle it and hand it to the right law enforcement agencies, or you find the vulnerable spots and you help weaponize those or whatever you plan there. I don't want you to spill beans, but I think there are really good things that even private or non-government entities can do to help that fight. I even thought about almost like a bug bounty, but for malicious infrastructure. Let's say you get your hands on ReEvil's command control server, hand it out to a closed bug bounty program where trusted and background checked hackers can apply, and they rip it apart and look for potential ways to break into other similar infrastructure. And then the money comes from law enforcement agencies, for example. I'm just making this up as I speak, but I think there's a lot the industry is exploring at the moment where we can prot and attack Reds or attackers' infrastructure.
I think it's really important. I recently saw during incident response where we had responded to a medium-sized company, we'll just put it that, and they were attacked once in September, and then you can see other actors jumped in as well, and it was almost as if they were working together. But the funny thing was they weren't necessarily only after money; it was also information. But this had to do with a transport type company, so part of infrastructure. It jumped up onto the FBI radar. But what I'm finding is a lot of the typical ransomware events that we're responding to, it's almost like the ransom is a secondary to the primary motive. The primary motive being more intelligence gathering and just viewing how that company does business, not necessarily taking anything from it or manipulating the data, but collecting the information. And I passed this by somebody who worked in an agency. I said, this is just my theory, but I really do think that a lot of these ransomware events, ransom is not the key focus. It's more intelligence gathering, like building dossiers on individuals. And he was like, I can't confirm nor deny, but you're on the right track. So that's what got us going on this, is the fact that there are so many ransomware events, and a lot of them are starting to migrate into not only encrypting hard drives or shared drives or servers, it's also going as far as going to the nimbles and to the backups, rendering them useless. And so here's these companies trying to stay afloat, and they call us. And before we even talk about ransom, that's usually the last thing we want to talk about. First thing we do is we try to get a pulse on what's bleeding right then and there. And then we try to move to, okay, what can we do to get you up the quickest while maintaining, consistency across the servers? And so we get them back up. Then we worry about the threat actors. But the funny thing is a lot of these threat actors are sharing the same entry points. And you'll see the smaller groups go in and start building their launch pad for other attacks, as well as, setting up ransoms. But the big APT groups that end up coming in, you don't see them move very much. You see them drifting in and out of the network, but it's more like they're hitting the shared drives looking for personal information or for individual views. Do you see that a lot in Europe as well? I'm pretty sure it's probably global, right?
Yeah, I would agree. It's you mentioned so many interesting points there. It's really hard to say these days what the actual motivation is in an attack, or sometimes even to separate threat actors in a single incident. We almost every ransomware attack we see, I don't have the data on me, but I would say almost every, like I said, is double extortion at least. It's much more about the data exfiltration these days. Not so much the encryption. I think a big part of our industry is still focusing on stop the encryption. But if you lose all your IP or your maybe dirty laundry or your emails to your competition or just by public internet, that really hurts a lot. And it's much more about business disruption. So not just encrypting everything like WannaCry style worm, hard drives, but hitting the business critical functions or maybe the link to the industrial control systems to grind the company to a halt, to hurt the revenue. So we see that a lot. But like you say, it's the initial point of entry is almost ubiquitous these days because it could be supply chain, could be access to stolen credentials, spearfishing. If you don't have good tech and awareness training, it just gets in 0 days or N days. So what we see a lot is that there are these entry points, often super low hanging fruits, open RDP servers without brute force protection, VPN technology with known vulnerabilities, not even 0 days, spearfishing, as I said, or others. Very lately, we see a lot of GitLab exploits for the Git servers because of the high level vulnerability and still exchange proxy logon, proxy shell. So there are these points and they are just getting hammered. So the companies, just getting smashed, and especially mid and low tier companies. And I think what's very nefarious there, being a technologist, we see a lot of automation in these attacks. It's very often still a manual attack, especially the ransomware, but there's so many lower attacks that just do crypto mining, and I'd say 99% is fully automated. They, as you know, they just scan the internet, they look for vulnerable services, somehow get in and then deploy their mighty functional backdoors and maybe their crypto mining. But that backdoor can be purchased by any threat actor normally, right? That's part of the business model. And then it's open season, right? I don't even need to get the initial access myself as a nation state actor. I can just buy it. And I think that's where that whole idea of thinking about assumed breach and, I don't want to say zero trust because it's such a big buzzword, but not trusting your perimeter, not trusting your DMZ, not trusting your crown jewels, but just see what's there, see what happens. You need that visibility. So I think I agree. We see that globally as well, more ransomware, double extortion, definitely more data exfiltration. And then we can just speculate about the real intention behind the attacks, right? It's attribution with just digital data is basically impossible. You need human and signals in for that.
Yeah, 100%. We did see a lot of ransomware as a service type attacks recently, which is really interesting. And when you say low-hanging fruit, we've had quite a bit of that as well when it comes to vulnerabilities, right? So Pulse Secure, VPN service, stuff like that, and the Exchange server vulnerabilities seems to be nonstop. The last two that I've done were both Exchange vulnerabilities, and it was blatantly obvious. And it's really hard for a lot of these companies. I was on the phone call with one of them. It was really late at night, and just hearing the stress and the agony of the medium business, and the guy talking about how he's going to have to shut his doors. It makes me angry to the fact that I know that there's a call center sitting somewhere, and they're selling these ransomware as a service type packages, and a lot of people don't understand the dichotomy of the underground and how these ransomware groups work. We talked about on a think tank. Exactly. You have one group who scans the internet and they sell that data to another group. That group goes in, looks at the vulnerabilities, breaches whatever they can. They sell that block of IPs on the dark web to whatever ransomware group that is the highest bidder. And so really the people attacking, doing the actual ransomware is really the last leg. And they don't even, half the time, don't even know what network they're breaking into or deploying it on. And it's become such a commoditized environment where, these people are high movers within financial sectors, Bitcoin, all types of cryptocurrency, which brings up another good point that you brought up about the US government going after Bitcoin. We saw that with the last big breach. And it kind of made me question how secure is cryptocurrency if the FBI is able to go and grab wallets?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And just taking one step back from the Bitcoin discussion for a second, because what you mentioned before, I think, is what few people realize, right? I mean, you and me, we had the luxury to see the red side, attacker side, and we also did incident response. We feel the agony, like you say. But for the attackers, it's just a job. It's completely faceless. They just move from target to target, and they cause so much grief and harm. And I still see many people in our industry say we need more cybersecurity experts and more incident response. And that is true, but that's not the way out of this, right? There's so many victims. How many mics and how many of our listeners that are experts are there to, cover that ground? Simply not enough. So when we think about active cyber defense, I mentioned earlier, I think Hafnium, the web share removal, or the emotet takedown. And just from an academic perspective, even just standing up a honeypot that looks like, an interesting system could be considered active cyber defense, because you lure somebody on your ground. You might be operating in gray or red territory there, which I'm sure you and me agree is quite risk-free to a certain extent, but still you do something outside your own space. And I think what's so interesting with the current discussions and what we see being conducted by governments is that this is maybe an efficient tool, some of these operations, these active cyber defenses, because there are too many companies and too little defenders. It's not scaling at all. So maybe there is a point to be made about helping them if they can't help themselves, remove that web shell, help them patch a vulnerability. I'm not saying pro or con, but I think we need to think about scalable solutions here, and just throwing more people at it won't help. You know me, I'm a huge fan of technology and machine learning. And I think there's something to be said about aggressive automation and defense from many different angles to scale out that defensive layer. But I also think government-led active cyber defense can be another solution, but it's never going to be unilateral, right? We need better, it can't be a replacement. Active cyber defense can't be a replacement for organizational resilience, I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think it needs to come from all sides and angles. And then, sorry for hogging so much speaking time. I always love listening to you, but you sparked so many ideas there. The Bitcoin discussion is also very interesting because it is so speculative, right? Whenever I hear people say, I invested in this crypto, I think you're speculating. Nobody has an idea how this actually works or who's pulling the strings or what the real model behind it is. And like you say, if the FBI can seize wallets one way or another, can you trust it? I'm not trying to dump or shorten a Bitcoin price or anything. Of course, I won't. But it is, even as somebody who lives and breathes crypto and cyber, it is very complex and very intransparent. And tying it back to our ransomware discussion, we see and always have seen actors shift to Monero as maybe a more bulletproof technology and even more privacy and anonymous conscious. So I think, again, these efforts of seizing Bitcoin wallets, that's awesome, obviously, and trying to impose sanction for bad behaving players in the DeFi market is good, but it's a whack-a-mole game, more or less, at the moment, because there's so many cryptos and so many ways to shift this. Even NFTs, non-fungible tokens, could be used to launder that money, right, if you wanted to.
Exactly. And it's funny about Bitcoin is, to watch Bitcoin currency and the value, I think an important key factor to watch is people like Elon Musk. Elon Musk directly affects cryptocurrency. And I don't know what kind of cadence or what kind of program he has set aside, like following, when he dumps money into Bitcoin, when he pulls it out. But you see him do that all the time. He'll load up money and dump it into Bitcoin. The value will go up, and then he'll yank it out and put it in something else. It's really interesting to watch how that market fluctuates. It's so volatile. But with the security of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it brings up a bunch of questions, right? So, like you said, if the FBI can get a hold of Bitcoin wallets, I mean, how secure is it really? And we saw this when, let's say, Tor came out, and everybody was using it to mask themselves on VPN and really get that anonymity. But the next thing you saw was the FBI bringing together some technology and building exit nodes, so that anonymity, when breaking the law or doing things on the dark web, that anonymity was slimmed down. And I wonder if that's the same method and the same operandus that they're using for cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good point there. I don't know what they do in terms of crypto. I would imagine it's collaboration between clever tech that's under lock and key and collaboration with the crypto exchanges or middle people, it's humans and technology. But the super important point you're making is, if there is a platform that a lot of people use for offensive purposes, whatever that might be, could be Tor, could be Telegram channels, could be encrypted iPhones, whatever it is, there's a lot of attention from law enforcement and governments, which means they're probably trying to backdoor it, not the iPhone, of course, but they're trying to get some form of access one way or another. And that's why there's always the argument in ethical hacking circles, or in people walking the gray line: do I use these big, known, secure services that are closely watched by law enforcement, or do I create my own if I got the tech capabilities? Because I can be sure it's likely not going to be as heavily in the focus of people. What I get concerned about is exactly what you say for cryptocurrencies. They're so volatile. And I think if you got the money like Musk and it's speculation for you, it's your fun money, that's okay. Everybody can decide that for themselves. I get concerned when I had that a few years ago. I was flying from Frankfurt Airport and I sat down to have lunch, and opposite me sat down somebody who works on the airplane, just hands out food, and one of the flying assistants. And he started educating me. He didn't know what I do, educating me on what crypto to buy and how to invest. And I thought, well, maybe you got all the tech knowledge, but it's not your line of work. And I guess you're just speculating and don't really understand what's going on there. And that really concerns me, because there's so many people in over their heads, I guess, where there are market forces at work that are really not predictable. And yeah, it could just be burned overnight. Plus the security, right? As a security practitioner, how do you keep your wallet safe? Does your non-tech friends, maybe some people in your family, your extended aunts and uncles that are in their 60s, do they really know how to secure their Bitcoin wallet? or if they don't, do they trust the Bitcoin exchange or the crypto exchange to do it? And we've seen how many attacks there have been against these crypto exchanges. And it's kind of the same with NFTs. I like to compare the two. When you buy digital art with non-fungible tokens, it's also just a piece of software that you keep in a wallet. And that's become so mainstream that, again, I'm concerned that mainstream people are not quite savvy enough to keep these things digitally secure in many cases.
I mean, if you look at the history of computing and online computing, to rely on the everyday users, to be able to secure their platforms, to any kind of degree, is wishful thinking. And when you look at the different financial systems, they've all been under attack since the beginning. Chips and Fedwire. Everybody's wanted to get into those two systems forever. And I think back in I want to say late 70s, early 80s, a Russian group actually got into one of them. But yeah, I mean, relying on cryptocurrency, I think the US government really pushes cryptocurrency a lot. Just recently, and it's really been interesting. And a lot more places are taking cryptocurrency here in the US. And I think a lot of that started during the pandemic, when I know in London, when I was there were stores that were not accepting cash whatsoever. Now, they would take Bitcoin and they would take PayPal or cards, but they would not take cash. And I remember back probably late 90s, a conspiracy theory that caught wind on the internet, and people were like, oh no, the fact of a cashless society. That was the biggest fear back then. But now it's like the world is embracing it, so that conspiracy theory is no longer a theory, it's becoming true. And I think, the more we rely on systems for everyday use, whether it be healthcare, automotive, transport, air travel, and financial, the more we rely on internet connected systems to do those functions, the more at risk the globe is in general. When you're talking about a whole financial system moving from what used to be, a general system within each country, moving to a global shift on a cryptocurrency level, I mean, that opens doors for attackers and puts neon lights around the door. I mean, because that's going to be the next big target.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mike. I sometimes feel like we live in Shadowrun or cyberpunk world, right? Where it's just cred sticks and everything's cashless and big corporations headhunt for the best hackers. It's reality now, more or less. Saying with a cheeky eye here. But I think I'm very concerned about what you just outlined, the systemic risks, but less because there's a shadow conspiracy. You didn't say this, I know, but some people think there's like the big bad APT and they're pulling all the strings and they have backdoors everywhere. I think it's much more just bad system design. We've seen that just in the UK recently, where I think somebody in the chain for buying and selling houses has been hit by ransomware, likely indiscriminately, just some ransomware affiliate trying to make money. And because of that part of the supply chain being interrupted, I think 1/5 of UK house movers couldn't sell or buy their houses, or have been in the process and now stuck because that crucial chain is down. So I think you're completely right. As we get more digitized and we see IT and OT convergence, another interesting aspect there, and just move to the cloud and BYOD and work from home and, digitized life, we're much more reliant on all of these things. Maybe not so much for critical, like, keeping somebody alive in a hospital. That is true as well. But the everyday conveniences, pupils and students being able to do remote learning, being able to sell your house, getting your cash out of an ATM, that's what impacts quality of life, besides the critical events that we hear about sometimes. So,
yeah, absolutely. And, talking about digitized life, when I got back to the States, I was having to be followed up for COVID. The online doctors that you see, I was thinking to myself, just with a simple tool like UC Sniff or anything like that, I could grab the video conversation between a patient and a doctor. I mean, how secure is our health records now? Because before we had the health industry maintaining those records for us in electronic version. But now we have to worry about not only do they have an electronic version, but you're transmitting it electronically to the doctor. And a man in the middle with something like UC Sniff or EtherCap can get your whole conversation. I think the more that we dive into the working from home was just the door. That was just the entry point into what we're about to see as a new norm. Back then, we thought working from home was the new norm, but the more I see, especially in everyday life, like if I go to the bank here in the US, the hours are minimized. And when I get home, they say, well, you can log on and talk to someone face to face via our system. So you're doing away with that human interaction completely. And we're having to trust the security of systems. And like you said, the engineering of systems, it's been this lifelong issue, I think, where companies want to be first to the market. They want to be first to the technology, and they don't really work out all the bugs because, hey, we can do that afterwards. Let's get this to market so we can be the first to market. So we're pretty much at the I guess, underneath the chopping block of those industries right now, hoping that our everyday life will be secure. But as you saw, like we had a ransomware event in the US that actually killed a child in the hospital. So it's starting to bleed into physical effects of people.
Yeah, we had one in Germany where a patient died, a woman, on the way to the hospital. That hospital got ransomed. They had to divert the woman in the ambulance, and she died on the way. It's absolutely terrible. But yeah, like you say, again, I'm probably a fatalistic German and very pessimistic. I'm less concerned about a mic sniffing with EtherCap. I'm more concerned about that healthcare provider having to make that data available over an unencrypted FTP server with a default password, and somebody stumbles across it. That's the stuff we see every single day. And again, people can say you have to. That's what we hear a lot in the industry. I think I'm very critical. People saying you have to improve your security, you have to follow these 20 checklists, but that is never going to scale ever. So, like you say, we have to work on systemic improvements, and that can be done through policy. That can be done through the big vendors. And, just the thing I believe in strongly is good technology, which is a tiny part of that, but something to help systemically improve these things.
Yeah, I think hiring into the cybersecurity field, we're doing a very poor job at right now. We keep advertising this skills gap, but when I look at different organizations, I try to get on the different job boards and just look at how they're posting entry-level jobs. And when they're posting an entry-level job for somebody who needs 5 years experience for the entry-level job, we're cutting ourselves out of potential employees, potential good employees that may not have the traditional cybersecurity background. And me and Kevin Thomas talked about this as well. When you're in college, you take history, math, music, literature, all this stuff to get a degree that says, hey, he's reached this level of education. In cybersecurity, it's not like that. You take one specific course, and usually it's vendor specific. You get that certification. Oh, you're ace. You're good to go. Why not have a cybersecurity program where you have to learn all the different principles? Plus, you got to have, your history, your math, your English. Let's go back to a collegiate way of training people. And that way, bringing them into the workforce well-rounded instead of, oh, yeah, I know Azure, but I don't know how to defend anything. That I think that's where we're failing.
Yeah, I think I agree to a certain extent on that. And I've got quite a strong view on, I don't think you said we should train people earlier. I think you said we need to focus more on how we train, right? Not vendor courses, but like proper cybersecurity essentials.
And early as well, because the kids nowadays have the technical ability to run an iPad at 2 years old. Why not start training them in elementary school on safe computing and cyber defense?
Yeah, I'm in two minds about this. On the one hand, I think that's what needs to happen at the moment because the world is big and scary and bad. On the other hand, I'd like my kids rather to think about becoming an astronaut or solving cancer and not worry about cybersecurity. So I'd rather, again, I'm very strong technologist head here. I said it a few times. So sorry for the strong views here to our audience, but I'd rather have us try to iron out these problems on another level where it might be technology or governments or, cross vendor collaboration or better standards than having our kids having to learn cybersecurity as a mandatory thing from the early age on. I don't think that's healthy, really, but I agree it would be necessary at the moment because there's no other way around it at the moment. But you make such an interesting point there about diversity. And I think the skill gap in quotes here for the folks just listening in, not seeing us, is very much self-made. Because if you look at, I used to be an ArcSight consultant. I used to implement SIM tools. There you go, chat pain. And also, if you look at some of the pen test tools or some of the current vendor tools, you do need 5 years of experience to understand PCAPs and Wireshark and EtherCap, and it's all often just a bunch of crappy scripts glued together. If you think about Backtrack 2 or 3 before Kali came around, my God, that was a lot of pain. It taught me a lot, but it doesn't scale. So I think we do need that expert workforce because a lot of the tooling and technology is quite inaccessible. And I'm not pointing the finger. That's what every maturing industry goes through. But again, I think if we manage to improve and make the tooling and the methods and the modus operandi and the processes more accessible to people, it gets easier to get more diverse people in. For example, here at Darktrace, we've got a very visual tool that works on various levels where Mike and Maxis can get the PCAPs and the raw data and threat hunt. And maybe a junior just sees the output of the machine learning and can judge based on that if they don't have the experience. Now, we hire a lot of people with junior backgrounds, but with data science backgrounds, or just, I like to call them intelligent sponges. So they're super smart. They can work around data. They can visualize things. And because some tools out there are very visual and storytelling, and you don't need to understand why a certain protocol is broken or the latest CVE buffer overflow, that scales much better. And some of our best threat hunters have not studied any IT at all. They are former teachers. They have been inside salespeople, code calling. They, one is a biologist, one is a linguist. One of our biggest thinkers is a linguist by trade, astrophysicist. And that is so cool. Because you get diversity in, which is not a goal in itself, but it helps you spark new ideas, especially if you go threat hunting or investigating. So pivoting into actual tradecraft here for a second. It is so powerful to get rid of normal biases. If you investigate in incident response and internal lateral movement, what you look at RDP connections, admin connections, PS exact, you do process investigations. I think doing external investigations with OSINT and VirusTotal and threat intelligence, that is quite well documented in our industry, but anything internal in a company, that is really hard to do and to understand. So seeing how some of my junior threat hunters, thanks to powerful tools, obviously, do these investigations and the ideas they have and the new thought inputs they bring in is just amazing. Everybody benefits from that. Plus, of course, besides the corporate perspective and the victim's perspective of having good investigations, for that person to join a growing industry and get presented with great challenges when they maybe didn't get the traction in their home industry or their home segment, that is just amazing from every perspective. It's not always that great, obviously, but it's been a really pleasant experience hiring people with diverse backgrounds for us.
Yeah, I think diversity in cybersecurity is very important. It used to be when I first got in the industry over 20 years ago, when you said diversity, you meant actually hiring a female, because back then females in IT, it was 1 in a million, maybe. But now we've gone from that gender gap to a more diverse background. and I think the true meaning of diversity, to be honest with you. But back when we were trying to implement females into IT and cybersecurity, I said it was always important to get both views from a male and a female perspective. We all have different views in general, but the male view versus a female view of a technical problem is you need that holistic view. You can't just go by the male thinking, the male, looking at the different types of attacks, because the female also lends more information into that problem solving. And this has been studied for decades, the logical versus the creative and so forth. But I think we've broken into a new diversity. I think it's really exciting for everybody, because no longer are we saying, okay, you don't have an IT background, we can't hire you. Now we're saying, oh, wait a minute, you went to med school, you know about how viruses work and how the body works. Here's the network. Look at the Ethernet cable as an artery.
Exactly.
Look at the CPU as a brain. That same type of thinking, I try to relate that to the people who work on my blue team. Try to break it down into different ways of looking at things, not just ones and zeros, but in life in general. And a lot of cybersecurity can be related to the medical field, can be related to academia. There's several ways to explain it.
It's so powerful and so interesting, again, because I didn't even think about male and female when I started speaking about diversity. Because we hire the people who are most fit for the job. We don't even care about gender, male, female, anything in between. It doesn't matter, because everybody brings their unique perspective to the table. So yeah, of course, there's the gender, non-binary, there's the background and your experience. But I found it very fascinating that people with no IT background, not just no security background, but no IT background, can do really, really well. And like you say, especially in blue teaming, when you want somebody anywhere as an employee or team member, you want somebody who's dedicated, focused, hardworking. And when you find somebody who's cross-disciplined, who takes the leap of faith to look at a different industry for whatever reason, they are often highly interested. Some of our really good developers don't have a development background, but they have a creative way of looking at the problem, combining interface design with structural thinking, and talk to different teams. And it is very powerful.
Yeah, it's a good challenge too. I think that a lot of people lack that challenge in different industries, and they come to our industry because we create that challenge. That challenge is residual. Recently, I went to Alyssa Knight's company, Knight Inc. Media, and she said, after my podcast, we got in contact. She said, I want you to come work for me and do screenplay writing. I've never written screenplay in my entire life. It was a challenge though, so I took it. I was like, sure, I'll take it. I learned so much just by listening to her and some of the tools that she put in front of me, and finished my first screenplay. I guess it was like 2 weeks ago. And it was an accomplishment for me. It's one of those things that I think we all need that challenge in our life. I think complacency is cancer. You get complacent and you get, into the routine of, oh, I'm just going to work to make a paycheck. And I think that actually shortens your life. I think the challenges that are put in front of me actually keep me going and keep me interested and thirsty for more.
It is purpose, right? And Alyssa does some really good stuff. So it's amazing to see you two work together on various things. And it's that challenges that help people grow. Also, if we take one step back and think about traditional SOC, security operation centers, if you read the literature from 10, 15 years ago, you had a level 1 function, a level 2 function, the threat hunters, the pen testers, and it was very rigid. And I think that caused a lot of the burnout and the churn, especially in the level 1 and 2s, because you just presented with the old school tools, true and false positives all day, and nobody can thrive. There's no purpose in that, except for you can really chew through and hope to aspire to level 3 sometime. These days, luckily, if you look at modern SOCs, where people get it, it's much more rotation, right? You got your level 3 hunters that join the red team for a few weeks to understand and work with them, use their tools. You have the red teamers work on threat intelligence for a while to create new leads. You got the level 1s shadow and join the threat hunters, which would be considered level 4 sometimes after the detection, the active threat hunting, to get new ideas. If there still even is a level 1, it's not being completely automated by SOAR technology or AI. So I think it's, to your point of purpose and intention, presenting people with new problems and challenges inside their comfort zone, so they can, at the edge of their comfort zone, so they can grow, but still have accomplishments, is very important. I'm not a people manager. I don't think I'm good at that. but I mentor a lot of people, and I always try to push people towards the edge of their comfort zone to grow.
Oh, for sure, for sure. We just formed a group at my company called Blue Bastion, and we formed a group called the Purple Team. But it's not an actual Purple Team. It's a phone call between the Red Team and the SOC, and we talk about new techniques and new tools, and give everybody a taste of both sides of the equation. And that was started, I guess, about a month ago. But what's really interesting at Blue Bastion Ideal Integration is the fact that when I went to work there, I was brought on by Luke McComey, Pyro. And I took the job based on our relationship because I always respected Luke, and he does phenomenal work. And I got to the company, and I just made it clear that I didn't want to do just one thing. And so they opened up everything. Not only do I do blue team, but manage blue team, and then red team, and work on pen test, and do all kinds of really neat things that I wouldn't normally do in a company that was started, let's say if I would have done this 10 years ago, I would not have that opportunity, because most of the time those were separate companies, if not completely separate groups. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that convergence in the industry as well. The only problem that I see with that new convergence, and sometimes it makes it difficult, is the platforms. So when we have a SOC 1, a very new junior analyst come in, and they're getting alerts from, like, let's say a SOAR platform or from Carbon Black. And they're looking at the alerts, all the alerts are broken down and all the data is given. So they're left with, okay, I get this alert, but what do I add to it? I mean, it's all here. And a lot of the customers get the same response too, is I feel like you're copy and pasting these alerts. And we're like, well, to an extent, yes, because all of that is being done on the front side. On the back side, we're verifying and looking for more traces. But a lot of the industry is not ready for that yet. And I don't know why that is. I think that, and this is my theory, is that a lot of the platforms, excluding Darktrace and some other, advanced platforms, they haven't really changed that much. Yes, the bells and whistles may have changed, but the operations and the data that's presented has not changed.
It is, yeah. I completely agree that vendors getting complacent and stale a bit, and everybody can go into that trap, obviously. I'm glad to work at this place here, Darktrace, because we are all about innovation. I don't want to, go into a rant about how much we innovate, but that is what we do: use machine learning, cutting edge tech, and apply it to cyber. And it's hard to justify your level 1 job sometimes, right? Especially if you work as an MSSP, either internal or external. I have this mental model of a detection pipeline where if you want to detect a cyber attack in monitoring, you have to have some evidence. You have to have a log somewhere. That log needs to go through a detection system, an EDR, an NDR, whatever, and create meaningful detection. And then the next step is that detection needs to get in front of human eyes. So the next filter becomes the human, right? Does that human triage that correctly, and do they escalate? If they escalate, are the correct levels and actions taken in appropriate time? And then does the incident response team come? And I think as an industry, maybe 10 years ago, we struggled getting the right data in the first place, right telemetry, right? That's why SIMs were so big and the big data crake and getting it everywhere. Now we understand that's not the way forward. You need to be smart monitoring, not monitor everything at once. And I think we really shift the problem then to, you have to have the right detections, right? I use the right use cases and try to engineer them correctly and the right thresholds. And I think with smart tech, we've gone past that. I think we're pretty good at detecting attacks. I think the biggest challenge is now the human layer, where you need to get in front of a smart decision maker and they need to take the right action. And that, of course, where the level 1 job previously was to look at the detection, triage, and escalate, that is via good tools mostly done because the context is there, the correlation is there. I could say XDR tries to move towards that, but I don't want to dabble into buzzword territory here. But I think it becomes difficult for new people in the industry to add value on top of that. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think that's actually good because I want these young people to rather pull the levers or create new detections or help make decisions or patch the systems instead of looking at a detection and saying that needs to be escalated, because I think that should be done with smart automation.
Right, I totally agree. We recently had a pen test, an internal pen test, and one of my SOC 1s that I promoted to a SOC 2 was the first one to catch it. And everybody was like, well, the red team said, well, we've been doing this for a couple of days now. I said, but you don't understand the monumental milestone this is, because let's talk about containment. Let's talk about identification of a breach. We're talking 290 days in most cases before someone even knows they're being breached. She caught it in 2 days. So to me, that's a win. That's a win. And you're right. I think it forces the more advanced platforms we have now that do that tier one triage. I think it forces the analyst to think on a different level and try to add value. And so what I've done is kind of put together this idea within the team that yes, those alerts that come in are very important. But when, let's say Carbon Black, when Carbon Black tells you to blacklist, that IP is blacklisted and alerts you to that, why is it blacklisted? What other platforms out there are reporting this reputational glitch? Put more into it, add your own touch to it. And so we've gotten more in the routine of narrating those alerts on a personal level, other than taking machine output and throwing it to the client. And I think that helps a lot too, because now with a lot of the advanced platforms, they're almost cutting your client communication down by the alerts they create. So I continuously want them to add a personal touch to it, because I don't want to become a shop that gives machine output to the client. As good as it may be, to me, it seems ingenuine.
Yeah, it's super interesting that you say that. We have something at Darktrace called the AI Analyst that automates the level 1 and 2 triage. It doesn't just, Darktrace creates a lot of point-in-time detections, interesting anomalies, Mike sending an unusual amount of data to a rare domain on the internet. And the AI Analyst constantly triages over these point-in-time detections, the initial leads, and then creates a narrative and puts them together and adds context. So basically what a level 1 or 2 would do, right? They put it together into an incident, from point-in-time detections to an incident. And when we do trials, so-called proof of values, we come into new environments, learn for 5 days, and then present the prospect or customer with incidents from their environment. And in a lot of cases, well, in the past, that used to be a bit human-driven, where, of course, Darktrace detects these things, and then we take a look and we say, well, these are the most interesting ones, so focus on those. Now the AI analyst does such a good job that there's not much to add, right? Our analysts look at the AI analyst incidents and think, yeah, well, pick these 3 out of the 5 a week and go with them because they're all interesting. So I still think that's a good thing, but I can definitely see where, as a service industry or as service providers, there might be a struggle. And also on the point of good tools in general, I think there's a lot of tools out there that do a lot of automation. Where a lot of tools fall short, though, is on transparency. That what I mean by this is, it's great if some EDR presents you with a big incident, but if you try to scratch the surface, where did the data come from? How did you alert on this? What is the detection engineering behind it? Show me the raw logs. In many cases, you can't do this. So maybe that's good for level 1, because they can just take that alert and give it to the client. But if you need to pull the strings, if you want to threat hunt on this, if you want to incident response, if the Mikes and Maxes come in, then we need the layers below that, right? The layers below the pyramid. And often that's not possible, because it's just pre-chewed and take it or leave it. Yeah. So that was my rant for the evening.
Yeah, my first impression of Darktrace, I have to say, I was a skeptic at first. And when I saw the 3D interface and the UI, I thought, okay, this can't be for real. And then I got into the advanced data search. And to me, from my background, and not everybody's the same, but from my background, I could have done away with the user interface and went straight to the data, because the data was there, everything was there. And any kind of platform like that you try to criticize, there's always data to back it up. And Darktrace is so smart when it comes to not sending alerts. I hate the word alert, and I hate the red, green, yellow, orange, all that nonsense. But when it's sending you information, all the information is tightly packaged. But when you get into the advanced search, it's all there, even the PCAPs, which I think is phenomenal. I'd love to take a look at the AI analyst portion of Darktrace now. To me, that's super exciting, because I think that's where we're going to go as an industry, is learning to automate more on the detection side. I do agree with you. I think that the human factor has to be involved, not only for creative searches, but also for some of the problem solving, and being able to look at things from an attacker's point of view. Because as much as we train AI, we can't train AI to think with that gray streak. It's either black or white. And so I think that we need to, focus on that as well. But diversity is key. And, I try to include that on my podcast. I've had groups like Blacks in Cybersecurity, and some other groups that were the diversity in the equation. But another thing I think we're failing at doing too is bringing some of this technology and some of this training to parts of the world that can't afford it or don't have the connection for it. There are so many great minds in those countries that we're wasting that talent. And I think if we make more of an effort as an industry to take this to the countries and the places that don't necessarily have this type of capability, we're doing a great thing for the rest of the industry, I think.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. I was just thinking about that when you said diversity again. Mm-hmm. It's also people, maybe not just in different countries who are poorer, but maybe in your own country who are underprivileged. Mm-hmm. Right? I sometimes, if COVID allows, I used to go to schools and teach children about career prospects in cybersecurity and, hacking and positive things. And I participated, not because I'm so great, I'm not trying to brag, I'm just saying there are really good things happening out there where underprivileged folks, people from underprivileged families, working class in the UK, or where there's problems in the social fabric of the family, they don't have access to tech or money or anything, but they're super smart. And, they lack the opportunity. I really love Chris Sanders' Rural Technology Fund. That is exactly hitting the sweet spot, because often rural communities, they don't have the access to tech, they don't have the funds for good courses at their local schools, and that has such an impact. And sometimes it doesn't have to be very strong. I said a few times, I'm big on mentoring and trying to create a culture of mentoring. I don't think it needs to be a formal thing with we meet twice a week and you read this and I talk about this. A young lady from Nigeria texted me the other day on LinkedIn and said, hey, I see you do threat hunting. Can I have a chat? I just entered the industry. And we spun up a dialogue and I went back and forth. What do you have threat hunting? What do you try to achieve? And it's just chatting really, right? Mm-hmm. But I always think the younger Max who broke into the industry and had a few great mentors, I would have given an arm and a leg for that kind of opportunity, not even trying to, get hired into this company, but just talk to somebody who's walked that path before. And I had I'm so glad because I had the chance to meet some of my heroes, right? Kevin Mitnick, I spoke at a conference and I couldn't get my book signed because my talk was when he was doing the book signing. So, I'm not on the same level as the people I admired in my youth, but I could rub shoulders, or Richard Bettlich from the big brain behind Zeek, and not Zeek, but Corelight on network security monitoring, or Chris Sanders, or yourself as a big light, right? What I'm trying to say is it's such a small world these days without many barriers. It's great to exploit that for good and help people where we can. I don't have to go to Nigeria to help this woman just get a bit better in cyber. I can just do it by investing 10 minutes a week and chat to her.
Yeah, exactly. One of my big influencers when I was younger and getting into the industry was Johnny Long, the guru hacker. He left hacking and started connecting countries in Africa with technology. And they have a thing called Hackers for Charity, which is an excellent group that helps out everybody that wants to get involved. And I think those type of people, when I look back at the people I looked up to in the industry, of course, people like Ralph Eshmandia, people like Chris Roberts, but then again, Johnny Long and those guys that want to give back and want to see us grow as an industry globally, not just internally, but globally, I think is really important. And as an industry, sometimes we forget that. I was just on a podcast not too long ago with some veterans, Jack Scott and Josh Mason, and we did stuff for veterans that day. And Josh Mason does some really great stuff for veterans, helping them to get into the industry, which I think is super fantastic. And it's funny you mentioned Mitnick, because I spoke at Kubrick conference not too long ago with Mitnick, and he spoke after I did, and I thought, you get to gauge yourself when you look at who you're opening for, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm here now. I still remember when I was really young and look at these people going, wow, I wonder what it's like, and I think that if you do the right things in the industry and you don't burn bridges and you give back, I think things promote you to those levels. It's not so much technical knowledge sometimes. Sometimes it's what you do for other people that get you to where you want to go.
Be a decent human being, right? And if you're motivated, cybersecurity is one of the best documented industries in the world. You want to do pen testing? Just go and do all the free VMs and learn hacking and watch YouTube tutorials. Look for mentors, reach out, and you be big, you make it great. You meet some toxic people, you meet some negative Nancys, you meet some people you wished you haven't met, but that's life, that's everywhere, right? There's so much optimism, so many good stuff. Just keep going.
I meet so many good people like yourself. You know, we had that talk in Cambridge for an afternoon. And from there, I mean, we've got a great friendship now. And I think that happens all over the place in cybersecurity. I don't think people pay enough attention to it. I think they look at them as colleagues and, oh, I met them and move on. But I like to foster those relationships because there's so much you can learn from other people with different viewpoints and from different parts of the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's good to be here at this time, I think. And really, I had the other day where I thought about, you know, the things I was able to achieve because of all the support I had in the industry. And actually, like you say, you know, speaking after midnight at a conference or meeting at DEF CON and Black Hat, some of the people I used to read their technical documentation and used to use their tools. And I'm nowhere near the same level as they are, of course, but, you know, I can approach them, or Bruce Schneier, one of the big academic brains, right? He talked about the coming AI hackers the other day, about applying AI to offensive operations. And that's something I'm quite passionate about as well. And of course, it's controversial and everything, but, you know, it's nice to see that I'm never going to be on his level, but we think about the same things. And I'm sure I can make an argument that he hasn't included in his ideas, and he's got 20 that I haven't thought of, but it is really nice to see approaching some of these professionals and, you know, being somewhat close to them digitally sometimes.
Yeah, that we should definitely touch on that on the Max Heinemeyer Vol.3, I think. When AI, the notion of AI first came out, my first thought was, yeah, it sounds great until it gets in the wrong hands. And I think that could be dangerous on so many levels. Like, you know, you look at the space race we're in right now and the nuclear arms race and all that stuff. We should definitely talk about that on the next podcast. But Max, we're about up for our hour, and I wanted to really thank you for coming on the show and being such a good friend, and, you know, always have such a good time with you.
Like, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and good to be here.
Cool. Any last words for the listeners before we shut it down?
No, just be positive, be excellent to each other, and I hope to see, hear, or speak to you soon.
Awesome. Take it easy, Max. I'll talk to you soon.
Speak soon.